Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and this is Book Club. In case you have never been to book club, let me just explain the basics of how it works. So every month, I pick a book. This month, it's How to Paint Abstracts, and I read the book. I do some exercises from it. If there are exercises, I take some ideas and I sort of tell you my experience of it. And I welcome your comments too about how you feel about the book. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Whatever else you have to say about it. I do want to mention a couple quick upcoming things, which is the next book club, if you're interested, is on November 10th at 12:15 Eastern. And we're actually going to be discussing my book, Carve, Stamp, Play. It's kind of the 10-year anniversary of the book, hard to believe. So if you've made something from that book, or if you'd even like to appear on camera, share the screen and talking about the book or something you made from it, I'd love to have you. So that's coming up on November 10th. I do also want to mention, of course, that if you want to see everything that I offer, you can visit juliebalzer.com to see all of that. Okay, so let's get started. I noticed that we have a new channel member, and I just wanted to thank Brenda for becoming a channel member too. Okay, so pop into the comments. Let me know if you have read How to Paint Abstracts. If you haven't, now this is an interesting book. There's no author. I find that really interesting. There's only a publisher. So my suspicion is that this book maybe was gathered from a bunch of other books that they had published, and they took like little pieces. I know that's something that many book companies do. So this is my feeling about it. There's nothing in the book that I disagree with. I think there's a lot of stuff that I really agree with, but it's also not necessarily really a manual for how to paint abstracts. If you'll pardon me, and I hope this isn't too like punny or spot on, it's almost an abstract manual on how to paint abstracts, if that makes any sense. So it's not the friendliest book, I'd say, in a lot of ways. It is a great size. However, a lot of art books are really big and difficult. So to start, I actually wrote a note for myself. It's a pretty book too. There's lots of pretty pictures inside and all that kind of stuff. But I actually wrote a note for myself right here that says, read the whole thing. So I just want to read this introduction because I think it's really good. So story time, here we go. Around the year 1910 in Europe, a new form of artistic expression appeared. It disregarded figurative references in favor of concentrating on the expressive strength of form and color in a work of art. It explored the essence of these basic elements without interference from clearly recognizable models. The new painting left natural forms behind and replaced figurative elements with an autonomous visual language which had its own meaning. The combination of colors, forms, there's that word again, by the way, and textures attempted to express emotions, a spiritual state, and specifically the artist's interior restlessness. That seems like a leap too far, but anyway. This non-objective style of painting tries to distance itself from visual reality, but this distancing is rarely complete since there are many levels of abstraction. Often people think that an abstract painting can be created by merely applying 3 or 4 random strokes of color on a canvas, and magic will do the rest. Abstraction, however, is much more than a random accumulation of a few careless brushstrokes. Although one of the main characteristics of an abstract painting is freedom, that is the use of a formless language that is not subject to the traditional rules of painting, this does not mean that it can be an anarchic. And I think they said an anarchic work, but I think they're talking about anarchy, and I don't know. It's probably proper language, but it's weird to read. Anyway, anarchist. Anyway, it requires deep understanding of color theory, total control when applying the paint, and skill with mediums that can alter paint's consistency. Furthermore, successful abstraction demands a working knowledge of composition, which can accentuate the formal and structural elements, emphasizing the boldness and expressive strengths of a work. Okay. So the things that I think that is really important here is just to note, and the reason I wanted to read that whole thing is sort of so you get a sense of the style of the book, but also to note that I think people think abstract painting is just like, oh oh my God, it's a painting. And really, I actually think that abstract painting is a lot harder than figurative painting in many ways, because you really have to understand design theory, color theory, like all these different things. So I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind. It is actually one of the reasons that I started Design Bootcamp, is because when I got interested in doing abstract, I certainly was like, oh no, I don't have enough signposts to grab a hold of to make these abstract paintings work. And so I had to sort of do all of that work. So hello, by the way, to everyone who's chiming in the chat, Cindy and Kathy and Ellen, it's nice to see you. So thanks so much. And I do want to mention my copy of the book is from the library. So that is always a good place to go ahead and get your books if you're looking for them. Laura, thanks for saying hurrah for Design Bootcamp. I actually just posted the 2022 Design Bootcamp dates. There's a level 1 and a level 2. If anybody's interested, you can find that all at juliebalzer.com. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep going through the book. I'm going to switch so that I have the overhead camera coming in here, and you can take a look inside here at what's going on. So a lot of this book is about the idea of abstracting reality. You start with a realistic photo, and then you keep going. But I really like this quote from here, and I think that this is something that we should all remember. Here you go. Oops, this way, camera. Thank you. Abstraction does not appear from nowhere. That is the key, okay? Abstraction does not appear from nowhere. It really is rooted in other stuff. So at the very beginning of how to paint an abstract, what they say, and I think this is a nice thing to know, is that they show a lot of things which I wouldn't consider abstract personally, but they're calling abstract, I think, because they're just slightly less figurative. This, yes, I would call abstract, although it's pretty sure that it's like a gravy boat. But I think this is an important way of putting it. It's a careful synthesis of any subject. So what you're doing is you're taking in what you see, whatever it is, and you're synthesizing or pushing and mushing it into something. So this is an exercise that I do all the time for myself, and I thought I would show you because I think it's kind of helpful. So here is my sketchbook, and I love to work from photos. I think that working from life is always better, but I don't always have that luxury. So this is a photo I took of my son. And this is the drawing that I sort of extrapolated from it. And then I kind of played around with some different, compositions. And then I kind of played around with some different color schemes and how I might mix it out. And then this is the semi-abstracted, piece that I came up with from this photo. So it does follow a lot of the composition that you see here, some of the colors, but if you were to just look at this half, I bet most of us, because we like to see things, would probably see, I don't know, chime in. Do you see a doorway? Do you see a house? Do you see windows? Like, what do you see? I kind of see a village when I look at this, or like people, around. So I don't know. That's kind of what I see. Whereas obviously it's not this painting of a little baby walking through a vineyard. So for me, a lot of times when I'm thinking of compositions and I'm trying to think of things, I find a photo that I like, and then I kind of steal some ideas from it. So that's one method of abstraction that actually gets talked a lot about, quite a lot in this book. Okay. So let's go ahead and keep going. So again, there's this word synthesis, which I think is a really important thing here. You know what I mean? And it says, interestingly enough, objects are detrimental to painting. And I thought that was an interesting statement, because why are objects detrimental to a painting? And then it goes on and says, because we pay more attention to their details, textures, and reflections than to their essence. So the process of abstraction begins with purifying the forms or synthesizing the elements of the reference model. It's important to avoid focusing on detail in order to capture the spiritual essence of the forms using loose, imprecise brushstrokes. So to me, this was a really interesting statement because it made me think about one of the things I like about art is that it's not a photograph. I like it when you see the artist's hands, you see the artist's interpretation, and you get the sense that like there's a story there, but you're able to sort of enter the story by yourself and kind of make up your own mind about what the story is. I see, that Ellen says it's a door. Laura says, yes, it's a doorway. What if you cut out the real photo of your boy and put that on the painting? Yeah. And I think like there are a lot of different possibilities of how you could, approach going after all these things. And that's the fun of some of the abstraction. And what you can see here is what starts as a series of buildings with, I think, some like birds down at the bottom, right? Then morphs into this, then morphs into kind of like leaves. And then that is what you sort of how you get to the abstraction. It's almost like playing a game of telephone. Did you ever play that when you were a kid where you were like, you say start something at one end of the line and then it sort of goes down the way and you figure out what else is happening. So that's another way to approach it. And then the book has lots of different kinds of techniques, dripping, splashing, gesture painting. So if you're interested in techniques, there are some here. It's not really a how-to book. So they don't give you like step-by-step instructions on how to do stuff. It's more like you would see like, oh, gesture painting, that's interesting. And then they will have like one little exercise that they have here where they say the gesture approach relies on impulse and sensation as the base of creative expression. The line follows a sudden movement of the forearm, which moves very quickly, so the artist has no time to reflect on the direction and orientation of the gestures of the brush. And then basically this is the demo that they show you. So it's not much of an instruction book. It's kind of more of an inspiration book. So you might be like, oh, I like this. Let me go look up gesture painting. Let me go find out some more. So I kind of think it's like good kind of basics. This is how they're saying, how to make an abstract from a real model. And they're basically, again, it's 4 photos. You have to really already know quite a bit, I think, about painting and composition to kind of totally get it. But again, still interesting. And again, there's nothing in this book I disagree with. It's just not a super great manual. Throughout the book, they do have different artists that they highlight. Paul Klee happens to be one of my favorites. And they talk a little bit about how you can sort of recreate his work. So Paul Klee's work has wonderful texture. I don't know if you're going to be able to see all that wonderful texture in there. And they're suggesting that to recreate it, you draw like basically a grid and then you sand it down and that will give you the wonderful texture. So that's another, that's a fun suggestion. This is it. Composition is key. Composition is key. Composition is key. So don't be fooled by your first impression. Colors and forms are not placed randomly when painting an abstract work. Everything is based on a studied arrangement of the elements, which is governed by a few rules, right? In no other genre of painting is composition so important. It is vital to the way we perceive and interpret the abstract images. So I think, people often want to take a class that teaches you how to make a particular project. And I always think that it's a better use of your time if you can spend it learning. One is different, like understanding how products work. How do different paints work? How do different mediums work? And also, how are things put together? Why do certain things happen? Because if you understand those intellectual things, it's the old thing about give a man a fish. That's when somebody teaches you how to make a project, right? That's giving a man a fish. He fishes for a day, right? He eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, then he eats for a lifetime because then he could do it for himself. And I think that that is so much of what my sort of big overarching art philosophy has become, which is I need to know the how and the why so that I can do it myself in my own style. I got a comment the other day from a member who said that she really liked my process vlogs because even though her style was totally different from mine, which I think is great, she totally can learn, right? Because I'm always giving you the why and the how of the process. And so I think that's really important to remember that the why and the how of the process are a vital part of understanding, not just make this project just like me. And by the way, a lot of people feel intimidated by that why and the how thing, but I'm here to tell you, you are creative, you are amazing, you are super smart, and you can do it. And that's how you become your own artist, how you develop your own style, is when you really understand all the sort of underpinnings, the structure of everything. Okay. There's talk about grouping and spacing, experimenting with colors, which basically, you know, all this kind of stuff. If you haven't sat down to do some color mixing, it really is a wonderful, great exercise to do. So here, basically, let me explain my little color key here. So these are the colors I started with: phthalo green, blue shade, white, burnt umber light, dioxazine purple, green gold, burnt sienna. And then I just saw what happened. What happens when I mix these two? What happens when I mix these two? What happens when I mix these ones? What if I add, you know, to this? What if I add to that? What happens, you know, and you just sort of play around to see what you get. And then this whole painting here was created using only these colors. Those are the only paints that I used, and I got this, you know, and I think that it's very interesting because one of the most dominant, if I cover up all my little color mixing things here, let's try to cover these a little bit here so that you can just sort of see the original colors. Okay. If you look at these colors and you look at these colors, you know, they don't necessarily right off the bat seem super related. Because for instance, this color jumps right out at you. Where did it come from? And so I think that's one of the super fun things about, you know, picking your palette and mixing your colors, is you get colors that are truly uniquely your own. So that's really important to me. Okay, so, oh, hey, it's Kat from Canada, and she thinks I just quoted her. I did quote you, Kat. Thanks so much for your nice comment. Okay, let's go back to the book for a second. So, so this was an exercise that I did try. So this is called painting a feeling. And they said you should draw 6 circles, and then they gave you some different emotions to paint, and then 6 more circles to paint some music. And the idea here is to kind of think about how abstraction works and how you can abstract not necessarily from a photo, but from the things that you're actually feeling. So here we go. Here are my 6 circles. And again, like, none of them are great art. They're not meant to be, but they're really just about expressing kind of, you know, thoughts. That's the way I'm going to put it. So what does love look like? What does nervousness look like? What does envy look like? What does hate look like? What does loneliness look like? What does sadness look like? How about jazz, classical music, disco music, tribal, flamenco, techno? Like, what do these musics make you think of? And you kind of go through. Now, I will say that I personally often go to a very realistic thing first. So you can see my classical, I don't know if you can tell this, but my classical really is looking like a person wearing a bow tie, because that's kind of like the first thing that came to mind, is like thinking of a conductor or somebody in an orchestra playing classical music. Now, that may not actually be, you know, it's not really an abstract. And I think one of the things that the book does talk about, and is also important, is working in a series. So if I were going to work in a series from this thumbnail, okay, and I were going to think about, like, what is it? I'm just looking for a pencil that actually has a point. How can I take this idea? So I'm going to draw a square instead of a circle. But how can I take these elements that I have here? So what do I have? I have the big bow tie. That's kind of an element I want to work with. I have this sort of stripe that has these buttons in it. I have these red stripes as well. I have this kind of circle, half circle maybe, like that. And maybe I have, is there any other interesting element? I guess you could call this negative space is kind of interesting. It's almost like butterfly wings that got chopped or something like that. So these are kind of the elements that I'm working with. And so the question is, if I wanted to create something a little more abstract with it that still had some of my ideas about classical music, you know, could I find a way to take these elements, and not necessarily all of them, maybe just some of them, there's the red stripes, you know, to create a more abstract composition. And I think that's a really interesting idea to me, is sort of how can you, work past your original idea into something potentially more interesting. Because a lot of us tend to go with whatever we think of first. And I don't always think that that's the most interesting idea. So that's one of the reasons I think a series is really, really worthwhile, is because these are probably much more interesting compositions than something like this, which just looks like a close-up of somebody's neck and sort of chin. Okay, so in terms of like how these kinds of things are useful, I think of them as warm-ups that just kind of get your brain going. I don't think any of this is kind of finished art that you're really thinking about. I also thought I would just show you a series. Oh, I thought I would show you two things, which is one, the last book we read, the watercolor book. This is the one that was inspired by music. So this was inspired actually by a piece of classical music, and this was inspired by a piece of classical music. So you may be a different artist on a different day, and that's totally fine. And then I do want to remind you about this exercise, also sort of inspired by music, inspired by a poem. It's called Ballad, okay, from an ancient song. But speaking of working in a series, let's see if I can find the page I'm looking for. Okay, so here is, I was working from a still life, okay? And, it's obviously a vase of flowers, and I'm trying a bunch of different ways of approaching this vase of flowers. I'm abstracting it. I'm sort of pulling out elements. I'm entering into some sort of weird Matisse phase here, I feel like. Until I ended up making these two. This is a collage, and this is a painting. So this is actually cut out paper, 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 cut out, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all collage. And this is a painting, and just sort of comparing, do you know what I mean? The experience, both in the making, but also in the viewing. I think this painting looks very much like collage, and I think this collage looks very much like painting. But again, I'm working in a series and trying to think about abstracting or loosening up some ideas that I had, sort of going past maybe, this is a very different picture than, let's say, this one, but it's the same vase of flowers, both times. So I think it can be really fun to sort of work your brain, sort of munch it around. Can that be a phrase? Munching your brain around? Okay, so let's look and see what else we have in here that I wanted to share. It's hard when I tab like here's the whole thing about working in a series, which they suggest. This is their series that they show how an idea can kind of evolve. There's some more, different kinds of ideas, artist things, abstract techniques, different kinds of things you can say. Now, I thought all this stuff about texture was interesting, and I'm a big fan of different mediums, and I'm working on a class for 2022 that's all about different mediums. So I decided to make some sample cards last night. So I'll show you what I made. So I took a bunch of tags and some of my favorite mediums that I have sitting around, and let me sort of decode it for you. So what I did is I put it on sort of unadulterated onto the tag, just like so. And then I also mixed it with a teal opaque paint. Then after both of them were dry, I put some red paint on the right side so I could see how it looked on top of it. Okay, and so this is sort of an investigation. Now, the reason that this is useful is, so for instance, these two seem very similar. This one on the right is clear tar gel. This one on the left is high solid gel gloss. These are all golden mediums, by the way, and golden paints. But if you're looking for that glossy look, you can see you might reach for these. Now, if I'm looking to see which one I want to use, when I look at the reference card, I can easily see the differences. So for instance, the tar gel is very much self-leveling. So this is smooth and rounded. The high solid gel is not. You can really see all the little marks and stuff in here. And when I mix it with paint, you can see that the paint becomes self-leveling. And when I mix it with paint, you can see that the paint is not. It still retains all the marks that I left in the paint when I left it to dry. Now, paint application on top is very similar, so that's good to know. So it's really whether I want that smooth surface or I want that bumpy surface, right? Easy to see when you compare side by side. The other thing is sometimes when I have a medium that I don't necessarily know a lot about, like let's say absorbent ground, I'll take some time and write down some notes about how it reacted or even look up online. A reference for you that I think you should know. I'm going to share my screen with you if I can here. A reference that I think you should know is right there. So this is the Golden website. And Golden does a great job explaining their products. If you ever have a product from Golden and you're like, what do I do with this? You just go to their website and they're going to explain to you what the product does, how it works, all the safety information, and you can definitely find out, you know what I mean? Lots of videos, other useful stuff. So that's a great resource for you. Just remember, it's out there. It's at your fingertips. Just Google or just go to the Golden website because they really do a ton of education. Okay. Okay, so I hope that that is a helpful resource for you. I find it really, really useful myself. Oh, and Selena says, this is helpful to know. They do have a great website, and if you write to them, they answer. That's magical. They are really, by the way, Golden is 100% employee owned, and they really are a good company in the sense of like the word good. Like they do good, they treat people correctly, they're kind, they're good to artists, and their products are great. So they're a company that I am always happy to buy products from and support. So, okay, so let's look through some more of these tags. And again, this is something that I do all the time with products, and I find it always really interesting. So let's say you're interested in the difference between light molding paste and coarse molding paste and regular molding paste. Do I have any? And hard molding paste. Okay. So now I've got 4 molding pastes here, and I'm wondering what the heck is the difference, right? And by the way, just talking about Golden again, this has become the Golden show, but Janine says Golden is really great from a customer service and product quality perspective, and I agree totally and completely. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out which molding paste I want to get. Well, the first thing I'm interested to see is, for instance, that the light molding paste is slightly white, whereas the coarse molding paste seems more translucent. And if I look at the results, I think I hope you can see this through the camera. The coarse molding paste truly has a granular quality, whereas the light molding paste is not. And if I hold them in my hands, the light molding paste lives up to its name. It's light. So if I hold the hard molding paste, I can feel that this tag is lighter than this one. So if I look at the difference between the light and the hard, they seem very similar. The only difference really is the weight. So now we're talking about if you're working on paper or a light, you want to use a light molding paste. If you're working on like a board, then you might want the hard molding paste. The other difference, of course, is I can probably poke my fingernail. Yes, I can. Right into this light molding paste. The hard molding paste, I cannot poke my finger into. So that's, again, about the difference of what are you putting on top of it, you know? And then this is the regular molding paste, which is much softer than the hard molding paste. I can put my fingernail into it, but it keeps those nice ridges, but it's heavier than the light molding paste. So again, there are so many products out there. You have to really decide what is the right product for the project you are working on for your personal tastes. But then I think it also comes down to substitution. So you don't need to have all the stuff. I mean, I want all the stuff, but you don't need to have all the stuff, right? So for instance, this is the coarse molding paste, and I have glass bead gel, and what else do I have? I have fiber paste, and I have clear granular gel. Okay, so all of these mediums give you bumpy texture. Do you need to have all 4? I mean, need is such an ugly word, but no, you probably don't need to have all 4, okay? This is the texture that you get. So let's just look at it kind of naked. This is the granular gel. You can see big bumps, right? Next up is going to be the glass bead gel. So you can compare it side by side. That's little round bumps because they're beads. So this is irregular and this is much more regular. There's those little glass beads. But if you wanted something even more subtle, there's that coarse molding paste again. It's not as bumpy, right? It's more subtle. And then fiber paste comes in to say, what about me, right? So again, here's the coarse molding paste on the left, and on the right is the fiber paste. You can see the fiber paste is much more opaque. And when they have the paint mixed in or the paint on them, you can kind of see that there's more texture, you know. So if you're going to do a Goldilocks thing, fiber paste is the least, then the coarse molding paste, then the glass bead gel, then the clear granular gel in terms of chunkiness of texture. Okay. So Janine says, I need to be better at experimenting with interesting products. I like it when a company puts out a sample size to try so that I don't feel like I'm being wasteful. Yeah. I like that too, because it's always fun to play with samples to kind of figure out what you like before you really, really commit. I mean, I think that's the whole thing behind these art subscription boxes, right? Usually the art supply company sends the product to the company for free, just so you know, Art Snacks or Scrawler Box. They get most of their art supplies for free because the company's using it as promotion, as marketing, thinking that if you get the product in your hand, you're going to want to buy more. And then they sell it to you. That's why they can sell it at such a good price, right? Because they're getting the product for free or at a very, very discounted rate. Okay. Because it's marketing. Okay. So anyway, I could go on and on and on, but you get the gist of it, how you can try out different supplies, sort of see the differences between them. And there are lots of other kinds of experiments and different kinds of reference cards you can make for art supplies beyond just what you see here. But this is like a really basic way to kind of get you started if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, and like I said, I am working on an online class for 2022 that's all about exploring art mediums. Okay, so the book goes on with different sort of techniques and ideas. It talks about stuff like adding collage. You can add collage. You can, I just really loved this final painting. I think this is fabulous and I love it. And basically it started from this photo. And then you can see collaged some shapes. But one thing they talk about is that collage should not be random. That the collage that's here, I think a lot of us just put like random texture out. But if you can make your underlayer of your collage and think of it more like an underpainting as opposed to being like just random texture, then what they're suggesting here is if the collage is purposeful, then it creates a structure for the painting so that when everything goes on top, it kind of makes sense. So if you can think of the collage as like the underpants of your painting as a, you know what I mean? That it's really creating that structure. So it's maybe not the underpants, but it's like it's the Spanx. Sucking everything in, moving it all around, you know what I mean? Giving it structure as opposed to just kind of being there. Then I think that that's a really good lesson to take away too. This is a bunch of experiments that they did. If you haven't done stuff like this, where you can see, you know, how different transparent paints work, different techniques, using a toothbrush, dry glazing, washing. There are so many art techniques out there, aren't there? I really loved this take on abstraction, I have to say. So here are the boats. And then this is the final painting, which I thought was beautiful. And I can see the boats, but if I didn't see the reference photo first, I wouldn't know that that is what it was. The last few pages that I tabbed in here is one, I thought this was interesting. So this is 4 versions of this. So here's the picture of like the rowboats or the canoes. And then these are 4 different interpretations of that same image. And it's just a reminder to not get stuck in like the idea of that there's one way to do something and that you could work from a single photo for probably a year and keep coming up with interesting interpretations, especially when you're exploring different mediums, different methods of working, all that kind of stuff. And then I personally love Gerhard Richter's work. I always find it really interesting when I come across it as a museum. The picture really does a disservice because normally these pieces are like the side of a building. They're giant and you really get like overwhelmed with the texture. But I like they showed some ways of basically making a lot of the lines you see in Gerhard Richter's digital work, but with paint. And the method, I'll show you right here, is you apply paint to a ruler and then you drag the ruler across and it gives you those kind of Gerhard Richter-esque lines. So I thought that was really cool. So it's the gist of this one, I'm going to say, is it's a good library pick. If you already have some art knowledge, I think this is a fun sort of overview reference. I don't think that this is a book that I'm going to add to my library because, again, although I didn't disagree with anything in here, in fact, I agree wholeheartedly with so much of it, it's really like a survey course. And I, at this point in my life, am not sort of looking for overview books. I'm looking for a lot of deep dive books. But this is the thing, which is I think everybody's different. So I think it's important for you to know where you are in your art journey may not be where I am in my art journey. And your way of learning may not be my way of learning. And that's always important for all of us to remember when we hear recommendations and see things. Do you know what I mean? You need to think about sort of where you are and what you need as a learner, as an artist, as a human being, you know, as opposed to what somebody else needs. So again, totally great advice. Composition is key. Got to work on all that stuff, you know, and if you're looking for a kind of overview to like if you sort of haven't ever really done an abstract and you're interested in dabbling and getting an overview and sort of knowing what are the terms to Google, what are the things you might want to look up? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think this is good. So Selena says that the text was worth reading to give context to abstraction. I agree. Totally fine. This was a great, way I would put it is this was a great library book. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I took it out. I don't need to keep it. I did write down a couple notes of things that I just wanted to remember. But yeah, 100%. And Janine says that her plan for winter is to actually do some of the lessons out of the technique books I own. This book looks like fun. Yeah, 100%. I will say my entire feeling about a lot of the books on my shelf has changed since I actually started to do the exercises from the book, even the ones that look boring. That has made a big difference. A couple announcements before we wrap up, and you're welcome to keep chatting. I wanted to mention that the Print Inktober class is going strong. It's $45 for lifetime access to lots and lots of lessons and information there. The next book club is on November 10th at 12:15. We're going to be discussing my book, Carve Stamp Play. If you've made something from the book and you would like to share it, I would love for you to send me a picture. If you want to be on camera talking about the book, chatting with me, I'd love to have you. So just send me an email about that if you're interested. Let's connect on Instagram. I'm Balzer Designs. I'm happy to see you. And if you want to get the newsletter every Friday, you can sign up for that as well. So there's lots of different stuff to do. Finally, I will just add monthly membership is a great way to support me and to get an art fix and lots of other stuff like that. It's kind of, I don't do Patreon, but the monthly art membership is what I do. Okay, so I am just going to say again, like, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I appreciate your time. Time is the greatest gift that we can give to anyone, time and attention. And I will see you next month where we're going to be talking about stamp carving. Yay! Bye.